guys getting your calcium today?
Boxed water is better.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jeff Sims. I'm creative producer here at the museum in the Chase Center for Creativity. And so I organize exhibitions in the open gallery, which is this hallway out here, and which is currently Spin Art, as you know. And I'm here today with Brett Ruland, who's a graphic designer, and he's the owner of Spoonful Records downtown, and Scott Carr, who is a musician and a record collector, and some of his records are on display in the exhibition. And we're going to be talking to them today about collecting records and what makes a great album cover. But first, very quickly, I'm going to kind of explain the museum's thought process behind doing this exhibition. Why are there record covers in the museum, and why do we think they're important? And then how did we pick which records to put in the show? So any exhibition that I organize here, it's got a big idea that's something very simple that we can tell people what the most important concept of the show is. And in this case, it's that album covers show creative innovation inspired by the crossover between music and visual arts. So what were we looking for in a record that should be in the exhibition? Were we looking for the best albums of all time and then looking at what the covers were? No. Were we looking for the best album covers ever? Putting some kind of like a criteria, like a judgment on record covers and trying to find the best ones? No, that's not what we were doing either. What we ended up settling on was 3 criteria for picking an album that should be in the show. And we were looking for album covers that define the visual identity of a musician, record label, or genre. We were looking for examples of close collaboration between the graphic designer, or the visual artist, and then the musicians that were on the record. And we were looking for album covers that show a fruitful exchange between music and visual arts cultures. So we like when creative people from different disciplines kind of work together, mix it up, and then something new and innovative comes from that. And so I knew, in the open gallery, we like to do exhibitions that are about the interests of the visitors, the interests of people in our community, and we like to partner with people in the community. So in this case, very early on in the process of putting the show together, I wanted to work with Brett Ruland and Amy Kesting, who are husband and wife and the owners of Spoonful Records. They're both old friends of mine. They're old friends of the museum. They've both worked here at some point, but for the past few years, they've been operating this record store. And I knew that they would be the kind of the experts that we needed to tap to help us figure out, exactly which records were going to be in this exhibition, and most importantly, they knew where to find those records because they know all the record collectors in the city and beyond, and so they were instrumental in actually locating and borrowing all the works that are in the show. So I thought, so we'll start the conversation now, and I thought that maybe one of the easiest places to start would be with the oldest works that are represented in the show. And I think the oldest record in the exhibition is from '38, and it was designed by Alex Steinweiss, who was a graphic designer that actually Brett and Amy introduced me to his work, and I'll turn it over to Brett to kind of tell the Steinweiss story.
Hi, how's it going, everybody? Alex Steinweiss was born in Brooklyn. He went to Abraham Lincoln High School, which was sort of a typical high school, but the one thing that it had that other schools in the area didn't have is there was an advanced art training program there. And, Alex didn't really know what he wanted to do. Like a lot of kids, he didn't know if what he was going to do when he got out of school to make money. But he was drawn to this class, and so he signed up for that. And the teacher was sort of innovative in his ways, and he shared a lot of examples of European design and the Bauhaus movement in Germany, and he was able to, have examples in the class of some of this fresh work that a lot of kids Alex's age hadn't seen. And Alex was so inspired that he, read in a Popular Mechanics magazine of how to like construct his own drawing table. So he went home and he would practice. You know, he got some quills and he would practice with pen and ink, doing calligraphy and typography, and he really wanted to get it down. And so he learned, you know, not only that, but he learned about all these different design movements and the actual mechanicals of how to make the art. You know, how to actually get the simple color field on the layout or whatever. But after that, because of this placement program, he was able to have a pretty good portfolio and get into the Parsons School of Design. Now he did sort of think he was a know-it-all, and you know he didn't really need instruction. He was a little bit egotistical. So the director, you know, pulled him aside and said, "Look, you know, you need to get it together, you know, or you're going to kick you out." And so being the, you know, arrogant guy that he was, he decided that he was going to just go out and get a job and, you know, do this design that he's learned already. And he met with a pretty well-known illustrator in town in his Greenwich Village apartment, and basically sat him down and said, "Look, you don't know everything. You know, you're pretty good, but you need to go back to school. But the biggest thing you need to learn to do is to work with other people. You know, you're just arrogant, and you're not going to get very far in this business with that attitude." So, believe it or not, this actually, you know, straightened him up, and he actually went back to school. He hadn't quit yet. You know, renewed the scholarship for 2 years, and ended up working with an Austrian poster designer, so that was another good hands-on experience. After about 2 years of that, he got bored helping somebody else do their design. You know, he wanted to do his own thing, and so he had his wife, you know, help him. She was taking the calls, and he set up a little studio in a friend's apartment. And 6 months in, he got a call that CBS had bought this record company, and they were going to rename it Columbia Records. And would he want to be the art director? Now, I don't know if you're like me and you're a designer, that's like a call that you're excited to get. So he took that job and did that for a little bit. You know, at the time, a lot of people don't realize, but 78s were the big format. They were kind of fragile. They were housed in books like this, individual 78s, and that was what was called a record album. And that term still gets used today for CDs or, you know, vinyl 33s.
Even a collection of MP3s, people still call it an album.
Exactly, it's still called an album. But so these were mainly sold in hardware stores. There weren't really standalone record stores. That was kind of, you know, surprised me, but mainly they were trying to sell the equipment, and then they would put, you know, these displays to promote the records by him. So that was what he was hired to do, and he would do point-of-purchase displays. Now, right when he got this job, they were just doing a reduction in price of the records from $2 to $1 per 78, so that was what they wanted him to push. And he worked so hard on this campaign that at the celebration party, he actually collapsed, and he was out for like a week. But it was a success. But he said he sort of had this epiphany during that time that, you know, the way they were selling records was wrong. You know, they were selling them in these brown sleeves that were just boring, and it felt like it was like a library or something that didn't really inspire him. He was just seeing the spines of the records on the shelf. And, you know, even though they were trying to save money, he went to the director and said, "Look, you know, you guys are, you know, the music you're selling is better than the way that it looks. You know, I've come up with an idea. It's a poster-like design that would beautify this and really, you know, try to let people see the artwork, and it kind of gives a hint of what the music inside is." So that was sort of a revolutionary idea. You know, they didn't really want to spend more money, but that was what it was going to take for his idea to come off. So they took a chance on him, and the very first thing that he did was a Rodgers and Hart 78 sleeve, and he used like a local theater to get the marquee, and he convinced him to let him switch the letters out for this Rodgers and Hart design, Columbia Records, and that when that first hit the market, the sales increased by 800%. So they were like, "Whoa, we need you to do all these other ones as well." So his time there, he was the art director, the production guy. He did like over 2,500 album covers. But one thing he said is that he didn't want to just use like realistic imagery that you were seeing, like illustrations. He thought that was dead. He wanted this fresh modernism of bright colors and graphics that really showed what the music was all about. So that was in 48. We'll get to that, but in 48. Somebody had played him this new invention. This was just 8 years later. And records only played for 3 or 4 minutes a side, a 78, then you had to flip it over. So he was kind of waiting for it to flip, and it just kept going. And it was like 10 minutes had gone by, 12 minutes, 15 minutes. He's like, "What is this? What's going on?" And the guy's like, "This is a long player. This is an LP. This is what we're going to be pushing. We need something to house it in. This old school format's just not going to work." So that was when he invented the actual LP sleeve that we still use to this day. Pretty much hasn't changed much at all, like format-wise. But
And you found a Steinway cover that was kind of struck you, right?
yeah, this is an example. This was from 1942, and I looked at this and I'm just like, God, this reminds me of something. I just can't quite place what it is. And like as I was looking at it, my hand kind of covered this portion here. I'm like, oh my God, this looks like Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. And one of the most iconic album covers still to this day. Probably the most requested record in our record store. You've had millions of other things. The Beatles, of course, Led Zeppelin, of course, but you just can't seem to keep Pink Floyd Dark Side on the shelf. And people sort of judge you by it. They're like, "Oh man, you don't have Dark Side. Oh, I'm out of here." This. But it's amazing how, and I thought I knew everything, sort of like Steinway's, know it all. I didn't know that this existed, so I just found that last night.
So one of the things that's interesting to me about Steinway's is that the decision to continue putting artwork on the albums. A lot of that was because his records sold better than the ones that weren't designed. So I was going to ask each of you, what are some of the things that make a good album cover? And I would guess, at least from the record label's point of view, it's the cover that sells the record. It would be a good one. But I was wondering if you guys personally, if each of you have kind of your own criteria about what makes a good album cover.
I think like Brett was saying, you want the cover to kind of give you an idea of what the music's going to sound like, but it's not necessarily always the case. But for me, I think sometimes the album art, is almost as important as the music inside, because it catches the customer's eye and the record buyer, and gives them an idea. For example, for me, like when I was first started buying records, when I was, like before I was 12 years old, I started buying records, and some things like. I would just look at an album cover and know nothing about the music, but the cover alone would make me want to, buy that record. It got me excited about it.
And some of the records from your collection were the Funkadelic records and the Iron Maiden records, which are two of my favorite groups in the show. But so can you tell how you got to collect these?
Well, Iron Maiden, for one, their first album came out in 1980, and I would say that's when I really started. People ask me, when did you start collecting records? And I didn't really look at it as collecting records at that time. I was just buying records. I collected Hot Wheels. And records, I just bought them because I wanted to hear the music. But Iron Maiden is a good example because they were a band I knew nothing about, but when I saw their album covers, it made me want to buy that record, and I knew just by looking at the cover, I would like what would be coming out of the speakers. So, as far as Funkadelic, I wasn't so much into them, when the records were coming out, it's something I kind of got into later. But they're a good example of a close relationship between the, graphic artist and the band making the music. They were very close, influential on both each other.
Yeah, Pedro Bell, I think, in fact, in the whole show, I think it was sort of the strongest collaboration between an artist and the musician. Basically, Pedro Bell, he would come up with these images. I once heard that he had sent the band a letter, kind of decorated up in this style with marker and whatnot, mixed media, and that they were so impressed with it. That was sort of how he got to work for him. So I think thinking outside of the box like that for an artist to get into the field and get to do the art that you want to do. A lot of times people are doing art to make money, but they're not doing the art they want to do. But what I was impressed with the Pedro Bell story is that, he would come up with little things like Bop Gun and Thumpasaurus, and George Clinton would actually, use those in a song. And, I'm impressed when the artwork can actually influence the content on the record. So, I haven't found too many other examples of that, so.
Yeah, and another thing about Pedro Bell was George Clinton became very, he wanted him to be exclusive to Funkadelic, because he was so impressed with the artwork. He didn't want Pedro Bell to go out and design, the next Aerosmith cover or the next, Kiss cover. He was very tied in with the Funkadelic look and style.
Yeah, and I heard that Gene Simmons wanted him to do a Kiss cover, and George was like, no, he works for me exclusively. And I guess later on, maybe George had run into Pedro in the village, or Gene Simmons had run into Pedro Bell. They got to talking about, artwork and old covers and whatnot. And he's like, man, I would have loved to have had you do a Kiss cover. And Pedro was like, I would have liked to have done that. So he wasn't even aware. Like George kept him, he didn't want him doing this for Kiss. So I think that shows you the power. He didn't want to break up his brand, of his Funkadelic covers by having another group have the same look. So I think that shows you the power of the art.
Yeah, and it's a great example of where I don't think anyone thinks of Pedro Bell without also thinking of Funkadelic and the other way around. If you're listening to Funkadelic, immediately Pedro Bell's images pop into your head, and it's just completely tied together.
Yeah, and another point with that, like Iron Maiden, the band themselves have never appeared on their album covers. It's always been their mascot. So Iron Maiden is kind of a faceless band, but their mascot is tied in with, their name. So.
Yeah, I was telling someone about the Derek Riggs who did the Iron Maiden covers. He was a self-taught artist, and he had done some different drawings and paintings, and Iron Maiden, heard about him. They went and looked at some of his portfolio, and they looked at a particular image, and they were really impressed with it. It was, the skull and all that, and thought it looked dangerous and, might look good on their cover, but they also thought it looked a little too punk rock, and they wanted it to be more this, metal sort of genre. So the debut album, if you look at it, they actually just had him add longer hair to the skeleton, to give it more of a metal feel. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I was trying to visualize it without that hair on there.
So the next thing that we're going to look at is there's a section in the exhibition that's all album covers designed by Andy Warhol, and so that's an example of where a visual artist has had this ongoing kind of influence, there's been this give and take and this exchange between the world of music and pop music and visual art. So Andy Warhol, in the 50s was a commercial illustrator, and one of the things he did was album covers. He did, I think it's a Count Basie record that we've got in the exhibition. It's from like the mid-50s. Continued doing album covers even as he's the most famous contemporary artist in the world. He's still doing album covers all the way up to '86 with Aretha Franklin. So clearly he had some kind of stake in pop culture, even though he was a fine artist and all this. Like he's still clearly wants to keep this hand in in the world of pop music. But this is kind of like in the middle of his career, and it's a Velvet Underground cover, and it's an iconic image and kind of an example of an innovation where this idea of the so that yellow banana peel, it's a sticker that would actually peel off. And to reveal this pink banana underneath. And so I guess a lot of you'll come across this record a lot where the sticker has been completely removed and it's lost. So we're lucky to have one where the sticker's pretty well intact. And I think that probably so all of the objects in the exhibition, nearly every object, it's a record that you'd be able to find in a record store or maybe in your own basement. And a lot of them, maybe records that you could find for $2, right? But this one's a little special in that because it's a good quality copy of this record, it's a little bit more valuable and rarer to come across. And so I was going to ask you guys about, are there any like holy grail records that collectors are always on the lookout for? And I've got here, I think the first image.
This is the Beatles' Yesterday and Today record, which when you see it in this state, it's called the Butcher cover because this is the way it was originally released. And obviously it was a little controversial at the time, and the real story of why this picture was taken has not really been disclosed, but they decided once it was out on the market that this was not the right image to promote the Beatles, and so it was quickly withdrawn, and they pasted another picture. Instead of destroying all the copies, they decided to just paste another picture over top of the Butcher cover, and with a more traditional looking Beatles picture, that you would expect to go and find in your record store. And it turned into this, which is the second state Butcher cover. And basically what would happen a lot of times is the cover would, if it got hot or whatever elements, it would start to peel and people would start to pull back and see what was underneath. And so we know once that happens, well, this is second state, and then once people start to peel the cover off, they call that the third state Butcher cover. So, there was a lot of these out there. So it's not one of the rarest records, but I would say it's one of the most notorious records, and it is, one that people seek out. Every copy of the Beatles Yesterday and Today, people are looking to see if it's, the Butcher cover, because, obviously later on they repressed it, without having to paste the new cover over. So.
And because so many people peeled them off, it's actually rare to have it look like this, where you can kind of see the other cover underneath. And like the Butcher cover itself, a lot of people, there has been no definitive answer as to why the Beatles did this, but one of the theories is that, when the record would hit America on Capitol Records, they always pulled two of the songs off of the album. They wanted to hold those back. So every time the Beatles put a record out, two of the songs were missing. And so it's been noted that, McCartney and them had said, they were butchering our records. They're taking these songs off. So that's one theory, that this Butcher cover and their Butcher outfits was sort of like supposed to be a joke, and went a little too far, hit the shelves, and then Capitol realized when it was too late they were already in the stores. But I spoke with a local collector who, there was a record, Woolworths downtown, the record department. He went in the day that this came out, or actually it was the next day. He was supposed to get there that day, but he couldn't make it. And his buddy said, well, they've pulled all the records. And he's just like, well, what's going on? He's like, man, it's just really weird. It's like, it looks really ugly, and there's just don't know why it's like this. And he's like, well, can I see it? And he's like, I'm not even allowed to show it to you, Wow. So it was, but some stores did keep the records, and so that some did get out there, so.
This was another kind of rarity.
Yeah, this is probably actually one of the most valuable records out there. This was Dylan's second album, and once again, like there's versions of this record with 4 songs that were later removed, and they added, researching it seemed like Dylan had just created some of the biggest songs on here, and they wanted to make sure that they got on the album, so they had to pull 4 of the sort of weaker known lesser known tracks, or then some people said that some of the songs were controversial and that's why they pulled it. There's really no definitive answer as to why it was changed. But one pressing plant, they theorize, didn't get the memo and pressed it as is. But like stereo copies of the rare version with these 4 extra tracks, I think some of them have gone for $15,000, and then there's only like less than 20 of the mono version available. So I think this is another like record geek kind of thing. Every time you see this record, you're like looking. You're not going to find it, but you're just hoping that that box in somebody's garage somehow just happened to have it in there. And you can never, even when you see that it's wrong, you're still looking at it really hard, just hoping that it's going to like change on you or something. But
so this next image, this is the most recent record that's in the exhibition. This is Run the Jewels 2, and the album came out in 2015. So, kind of the remarkable thing to me about that is that, a few years ago, maybe this record would not have even been released on vinyl. And vinyl's definitely made kind of a comeback. You can go to like Barnes & Noble. You can go to our museum store here and buy vinyl records, that are new recordings.
what?
So, Brett, like how have you seen? So you opened the store 2 years ago?
2010.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's been 6 years. I know it's hard to believe. But.
Yeah. So how have you seen the vinyl business
a lot of
change?
people come in, they're like, wow, like, do you guys re-shrink wrap these things, or where do you get these things from? Like, it's a mystery. Really what has been, driving the record and the vinyl industry are the new artists putting out vinyl. The old stuff's cool, and they're doing reissues occasionally, but the newer groups have what's drawing the younger people into getting into records. And my dad works in the store with me, and even he, has been there a few years, was like, what is it about these new groups wanting to put out vinyl? I'm just curious, why would they want to put their record on vinyl? And I said, well, the thing that makes me think of it is like, say I'm like a big Dylan fan, and I kind of want my record that I'm cutting to be on that same format as him. I can put it up on the shelf next to his, and that sort of gets me a little bit closer to the masters. So I think there's something about that pure art form about it, and vinyl. So, but like I said, I think it's the newer artists doing it. You'll watch the Tonight Show or all these talk shows, and they're holding up the actual album, not the CD or whatever.
Yeah, I think one of probably the biggest successes probably over the past couple of years is a band that's actually from Columbus, 21 Pilots, and they're pressed their record on vinyl. And I mean, I've had I work at another store, not Brett's store here in town, but we've had kids come in and buy that record, and they don't even have a turntable. They're just excited to see it on vinyl, and then they got the record, so hopefully the thought is they'll actually go buy a turntable to play it on. But that's just an example of.
Yeah, I think it's the size, like that physical format. They're like, man, this looks a lot cooler in this size. Like, and they'll pick it up, and sometimes they'll carry it around and they'll put it in the wrong spot, but they just want to be close to that, because it's their favorite band, and there's just something that just feels like more personal about that format.
Because you can listen to anything for free.
Yeah.
You have access to the music for free now, but then to kind of make the commitment to actually purchase the physical object, it feels like you're a little bit more part of something.
Yeah, I mean, like when I was a kid, and same thing. Like when I bought it, it's like, this is mine now. You know what I mean? Whereas like having an MP3, it's yours, but it doesn't really feel like you can't hold it in your hand, and
Yeah.
And it does have a better sound. Sometimes people say a warmer sound, but I don't necessarily think that's really it, though. I think it's just, if you're going to collect it, if you're going to have it, it's like having the real painting on your wall versus like a picture of it in the book. It just doesn't seem like the same. It's like as I joked when I was younger, I thought that my street credibility went up if I had these particular albums, and maybe people were impressed. They probably weren't, but.
This next slide, there's 2 more records that are in the show. On the left is the cover of the album Cheap Thrills, and drawn by Robert Crumb. And on the right is the Casualties of Happiness, which is a Hugs and Kisses record. And that was drawn by a cartoonist, Fonzie Davis, who lives here in Columbus. And so it was, like I said, with the open gallery, we like to include, they're exhibitions about the interests of the community, and we like to partner with the community and represent some of the creative community in the city. So I was very happy to include Fonzie's work in the show. And so you can see that that Fonzie's drawing is a direct kind of homage to R. Crumb's. And I think there's about 40 years between the Cheap Thrills record and the Hugs and Kisses record. And so that kind of paying homage to older designs that are kind of classics. We saw that with the Dark Side of the Moon, paying tribute to Steinway, and then of course there's this famous Clash record, London Calling, which is kind of a direct reference to the Elvis Presley record, which I think that by now that the Clash's tribute to Elvis is more famous than the original.
And I noted that the original photographer of this photo just took it at a club in New York City, and the designer and designer had picked it, and she's like, no, that's too blurry, and I don't want to use that. And they're like, no, this has got to be the image, and then it's been voted I think #1 rock image of all time or something. I mean, everybody's got their own personal, but I think the action of him destroying this guitar or this bass, Fender bass, but you just never know how close something was to getting the axe and not becoming this iconic thing. I mean, how many records out there have bad covers because somebody wasn't willing to take a chance, and do something a little more striking, simple like this. But
I want to jump back to the idea of the local community, the local music and record recording community, the record collecting community. It seems like there's a lot of collegiality. I think that the opening night of the Spin Art exhibition, we had about 10 of the collectors whose records were in the exhibition come, and they're all hanging out. And of course, some of those have their own record shops, and so you were clearly in partnership and collaborating with people who run other record stores, and you guys all get along. But I'm wondering if there's some kind of competition among the retailers, but also among the collectors, because I know that probably people have their secret spot where they're digging for the rarest records, right?
Yeah, that's one thing about promoting the store is not everybody, if they like what you've got and it works with their taste, they don't always want to tell their friends because they're they want to keep coming back and finding the good stuff for themselves. So.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the stores go, I think there's a healthy competition between the stores, and most of the stores in town, I think, get along, and I mean, me as a record buyer and collector, I consider myself lucky to live in a city like Columbus because we have such a wealth of record stores. I mean, I go to other cities and they might have one, you know what I mean, and we have maybe 10 or...
Yeah, I think there's 12 or 13 if you include some of those sort of underground shops that are just open one day a week, or, there's definitely, and there's, people that have sort of a record store in their garage, kind of. We don't really talk about that, but...
And then as a record buyer, definitely if I go into a store and I see certain people, I'm like, oh man, they probably just got all the good stuff, so I might as well not even bother looking through the bins. So, I mean, there is that...
yard sales and thrift stores are a lot when I was growing up, how we found stuff. And you had mentioned earlier, did you ever pick up a record just because of the cover? And I think about half the items in my collection were like that. Because when you're getting them cheap, you're willing to take a chance on something that looks interesting. And sometimes, it's completely awful, and, the cover's the best thing about it. But for a buck, it doesn't make much difference.
So these 3 records are included in a section that's all about the band Pink Floyd and the work that they did in collaboration with the design group called Hypnosis, which is spelled Hipgnosis. And so that's an example of one of the criteria that I'd mentioned at the beginning of how we selected records, where the musicians and the visual artists were working closely together and collaborating and actually coming up with the concepts together. So it wasn't just a kind of a work for hire thing where a record label, finds an artist and who designs the cover independently of the band's
That
input.
was what Steinway's did. They pretty much gave him free reign to the musicians had no say in what he did.
Right.
So.
And then when you get to Hypnosis and Pink Floyd, they're actually, I think that some of them were roommates, right?
They were art school, and they actually, the very first cover they did for Pink Floyd, they still were in art school, and they used like the school's lab, and then Pink Floyd really liked their stuff, so they had to kind of get a real space to do their studio work at that point.
So I was wondering if you guys, like, from the point of view of a graphic designer and a musician, or from the point of view of a musician, do you have any especially positive or negative experiences collaborating with a band or with a visual artist and trying to come up with, an image that's going to like represent you and represent your music?
For me, I was in a band a couple years ago, and we released our own 7-inch single. And for the cover art, I had a very specific idea of how I wanted it to look, and it was kind of like, like the a tribute, kind of like the Clash record was to the Elvis Presley records. I had a very defined idea when I went to the artist that did the record for me. It was a tribute to a Beatles record, and so it was kind of the idea I had was to have a familiar look to the record, and it kind of, just to kind of bring attention to the project, and so that was a positive experience. And I considered it somewhat of a collaboration, but I also had a predetermined way I wanted the record to look. So
before I opened the record store, I did Spoonful Records just as a hobby, and I kind of helped out some friends of mine put some records out. And secretly, I wanted to design all the covers and have this display of album covers on the wall. I wanted them to kind of go together and have this sort of like look that continued throughout. And I think convincing some of these bands, that what they wanted to do, wasn't really going to work for the record. Sometimes, they had better ideas than what I did, and we just rolled with that. And so I think being able to listen to what they want but going into it, I guess I didn't realize it, but I was kind of being more like Steinway, where I just kind of had a little bit of an arrogant attitude, like this is it, I'm gonna had to convince them. But I think keeping a strong design sense. Now that I have the record store, certain things like I notice, like when bands put the name at the bottom of the sleeve or don't have the name on it at all, you're competing with every other record in the store. So unless you're Pink Floyd, Dark Side, your record just gets skipped over because people don't know who you are yet. So sometimes groups that'll do something like this now will put like a little hype sticker at the top with their name, and because when you're flipping through the bins, people are doing it really quickly, and you want something to pop, and you have to pick it up first. The record gets you to pick it up unless you already know of the music. And so I think strong colors and there's really no formula to it, just like there's no formula to making a great song. It's got to just be fresh and original. And
yeah, and I memean, a lot of the images, like the Pink Floyd, you want a strong image because, when it comes down to it is kind of marketing, and I mean, like Tower Records used to do huge displays, and you go in Tower Records and you'd see like just a whole wall of Dark Side of the Moon, and that's a pretty strong image. So you want, something that's very eye-catching, and
It's kind of funny to me that the LP packaging, it's always going to be the same size. Like you
Right.
might be able to make it a fold out, and you can kind of expand it in that way. But really, the first thing that you're going to start with is you've got that like 11 1/4 by 11 1/4 square, right? That's a kind of an interesting restriction. And
Right.
when you think that that since the late 40s, it's been exactly that, and to think of the variation and kind of the innovations that artists have come up with within that restriction, it's kind of amazing.
And I think with Hypnosis especially is that they kind of Steinway had created this sort of language and narrative and through his covers that liner notes on the back, and name at the top or name on the front bold and title a little smaller. And I think it's interesting that when Pink Floyd, when they did some of theirs, they had to kind of get away from that. Like, so the design had sort of reached a point in graphic design that it was just getting a little bit the same and boring. And I think, making it simpler and, having less. But I mean, it helps when you're Pink Floyd and, people are going to buy your record no matter what. But I do think it creates for some great album covers. And
So one thing that we've really learned from the visitors who have been coming to the exhibition is that people come across things that give them a kind of rush of nostalgia. And I'll tell you, I just put this one up because this is the one that kind of does that for me. And these are all designs by Von Oliver, who was kind of like the house designer for this label 4AD. And so, these, like, especially the three here in the middle, the Pixies record and Breeders Pod and This Mortal Coil, like those were records that were really important to me, when I was like in late adolescence, I guess. But, when I first started really getting into music and feeling like the music I was listening to was kind of mine. It wasn't just something that I was hearing on the radio, but it was something that I had sought out, and I kind of felt like a collector. And with Von Oliver, I knew that if I saw a design that he had done, I knew that, I might not know anything about what kind of music is on the record, but I knew at least it was going to be interesting, and I could risk, paying the money for that record. And so, those are records that are still in my collection. And I guess I was going to ask you guys a question about your own personal record collections, after years and years of buying records, like how big have your collections ended up being, and do you have to get rid of stuff?
well, it was pretty big before I opened the record store.
Yeah.
But
Is that how you opened your record store?
yeah, it was pretty much. I had about 8,000 albums, and my fiance at the time, wife now, was kind of like, man, might need to sell some of these.
Yeah.
So, I was trying to think what I was going to do. I had been doing design for about 17 years at that point, and my other passion had been vinyl and record covers and, the music business. And so when I opened the record store, I kept about 2,000 albums, and it's grown a little bit since then. But I think when you decide to, open the store, then you decide to put in some of that music back out in the world, and, maybe you get the same thrill out of telling somebody about this particular record, or when you found it, or, what's, if you like that, you need to try this. I guess it's the same thing that Amazon tries to tell you, but I like to think that I can tell them a little bit extra.
Yeah, my collection right now is I probably have about 5,000 records in my collection, and I'm currently not married, so it'll probably continue to expand. But I tend to get rid of my records sometimes. Like if I run into somebody that maybe hasn't heard one of my favorite records, say like, Get the Knack or Buy the Knack, and I may have an extra copy of that, or just give them my copy because I know I'll find another one. You know what I mean? So a lot of times I'll weed out my collection just by turning other people on to something that I love and think that they'll enjoy as well.
So this is, I mentioned earlier how you could kind of expand the kind of the field that you can play with a record with the gatefold. So this is a very elaborate kind of example of that. This is Roger Dean with a kind of a double gatefold for the band Yes. And, so this is an example where I don't think you ever think of the band Yes without a Roger Dean, one of these fantasy landscapes popping into your head. And of course, vice versa. You see one of his images and you either think of the band Yes, or maybe you think of the movie Avatar, this is, I guess, an example of really elaborate, kind of extravagant record design. And I was going to ask you guys, what do you think? Like, was there a high point for album design?
I think just from some of my favorites, between about 66, to about 73. Like most of my faves, I feel like are some of the strongest covers of all time are in that era. It's about 66 to 73, but also when Steinway's kind of started out in 48, I mean, he really did some amazing stuff that people were obviously imitating to this day,
Yeah, I think probably the 70s, pretty much as a whole, was probably the high point for probably record sales and the record cover, because I think they got more creative as far as the whole package. You know what I mean? Sometimes you get a record and it'll fold out like this, and it may even have like a poster or 3 posters, or so like the artwork almost seemed to expand even beyond the cover, because you would have inserts and wearing sheets and
iron on for your T-shirt.
Yeah, so I think a lot of that definitely during the 70s. I think the expansion of the artwork really it really expanded during that decade.
You said you think that went along with an expansion of sales, like actual record sales were at a peak,
Yeah, I think so, because a lot of times they would even promote that with a sticker on the record, like it includes a cover or a poster, or so I think that helped increase sales of the you had this bigger package, so you're like, I'll spend my money on that.
I think the format itself just lent itself to real intricate, elaborate designs. And in fact, the Hugs and Kisses one is a good example that was inspired by the Robert Crumb, but having this elaborate cover that's got all these little details that you can look at 100 times and see different little things you missed. When CDs became sort of the norm in the 90s, designs got a little bit simpler and got away from that elaborate design, which to me was what made a lot of the covers so beautiful, was all the detail that you could keep looking at. But when you looked at this small version, it just didn't, like that Hugs and Kisses, even to see it small like that doesn't pop like seeing the full-size 12-inch. So I think when CDs came in, it did sort of get to a little bit of a low for cookie cutter design, and just computers were out, the internet was out. A lot of stuff just looked the same to me. I think 4AD, 23 envelope, Von Oliver's design firm, was one of the exceptions to the rule in the 90s. He really pushed it even further,
We'll look at one other kind of innovator. This is Peter Saville, who again was kind of like a house designer for a record label. In this case, it was Factory Records. And on the left, that's the New Order album, of course, with that really kind of iconic image. And then on the right, Joy Division on the left and the New Order on the right. And the one on the right was actually die cut so that it resembled one of the old kind of floppy disks. And then something that when I was putting the show together, I found out that the little color blocks that run down the right edge, it's actually an alphabet. Kind of a code that he created. So I think this says, so if you read it from top to bottom, it's FAC, which would stand for factory, and then the number, I think, is 37, which would be, so that's the 37th release from Factory Records, and then it says Blue Monday, which is the name of the single. But anyway, so that's kind of, that's a really, it was kind of a minimal as far as the design, it was very minimal, but then the actual production of it was really elaborate because it required all this die cutting.
I think they said that they lost money on everyone that sold.
Yeah. So with that, we've talked about kind of like the high point of record design, and then, looked at some of the innovators, like what's happening now, like with vinyl making a comeback and being on the rise, like what are some of the innovations that people are coming up with now?
I feel like the design itself, I've noticed things going back towards a more elaborate look. Like Father John Misty's new album has sort of a real pink, sort of dreamy kind of atmosphere on the cover. And it just seems like it's kind of going back to the original stuff.
I think they're definitely putting more attention into packaging and how the record looks. Even that Jack White record that was... had tons of, little
bells and
whistles on it. It was, so I think they're definitely putting a lot more back into it now that, people are buying the vinyl records again. So.
Some of them, the sleeve design, the format hasn't changed much, but some of the actual materials, like the papers. You see printed brochures from the museum as well that are on papers that might have like a softer feel to it, or there's lenticular covers. It's not necessarily a brand new idea, like the Rolling Stones did that, the 3D imagery, but it just looks different now. Technology's advanced a bit, and some of the 3D covers, I'm just like, wow, this thing really pops. I guess it's like a 3D movie that when I was a kid, it was just boring. You thought you were seeing 3D, you'd look at your hand, but now it's like, wow, this is really working. But so I think the materials themselves have changed, but the ideas are kind of the same.
Even the vinyl record, they press them in just about any color you can think of.
I saw a Flaming Lips album where the vinyl was like a sandwich, and in between the two layers was actual blood.
Right. Yeah, and some of them have etchings on them, so they've gotten very, like I said, the art has kind of gone beyond the cover even, so it's actually on the vinyl.
Yeah, I think some of it gets a bit gimmicky. I'm a bit of a purist, but I bought my fair share of limited colored vinyl runs, but I think now everybody's competing because the pressing plants are working overtime to keep up with the demand, and the one thing I'm afraid that's suffered is the quality control a little bit on the vinyl itself. You might pull it out and it's slightly warped, or usually you can send it back, but I think it's just these presses. There's like about 12 presses in America, and they're just like working maybe 3 shifts, to try to keep up with the demand. So when I was doing my record label as a hobby, it was, you could get a deal on something. Come on, you can do a little better than that. Now they just laugh at you.
Well, I think we have a little bit of time for any questions that you all might have.
How many in here are still playing records to this day? Anybody?
I'm in my 70s, and I can tell you how much money I've spent in my entire life buying records. Zero. I've never owned a record. I've never owned a record player. I've never played a record.
Wow.
I listen to the radio. I turn on the radio as soon as I get up in the morning. I listen to music, all day
Yeah.
long. I've never dreamed of actually buying a record.
I
Around, because once you hear it a couple of times, that's, it's boring. And so, am I really way off in the spectrum of people?
I think there's probably a lot more people like that now, where like they just they stream music on Pandora or Spotify, or listen to the radio's still pumping out music.
Yeah, to me that kind of seems more of a viewpoint of a new music listener. You know what I mean? Because we get collections in our store that we buy records from people that collected vinyl records over the past 40, 50 years. And that seemed to be it was obviously the medium that everybody wanted to have. So.
Well, I think that not everybody feels the need to own it, to have the music or whatever, to like possess it, or in a way, I think even all of us that do collect it, to have it, we know that there's something about it that's probably wrong.
Yeah, I think you got to for people that have like 5,000 records, obviously there's something in me that has that, that collector gene. You know what I mean? I don't think you expect everybody to have 5,000 records.
We're the opposite. We'll have like 3 copies of a record, and you just play it constantly. And I've heard Led Zeppelin, way more than I never need to hear another Led Zeppelin record, but usually because we're testing them at the store for skips and whatnot. But but I think, I don't know. I think maybe, were you introduced to music through the radio? Was that how you first heard the music?
Sure, it was always playing in our house.
Yeah. So I think it's that sentimental thing.
I don't ever remember.
Yeah.
My brother probably has 10,000 books. I probably have thousands, Morgan silver dollars.
Yeah.
But I don't ever remember seeing a record in our house. The music played all the time.
Yeah, I think it's that sentimental thing. Like my sister, growing up, I was at the age where she had all the album covers, and I would sneak into her room and want to listen to it. So I think it kind of, for me, takes me back to being a kid a little bit, and that excitement of seeing this mystery world of these bands that, like, for example, the Iron Maiden covers, you just seemed like it was this little club or this world that they created with their records and stuff. So, but
Yeah, it's funny. I have certain records in my collection that I've had since I was a kid, and they may have like a certain, maybe a skip in it or something that I've gotten used to listening to, and if I hear it any other way, it sounds wrong to me. So sometimes those little imperfections, make it a little more special. Like you said, every MP3 you hear is going to sound the same.
well, it's like when you just go outside the building and you listen, there's so many things going on. You can hear a plane, you can hear cars, sirens. I think when you're hearing a record, if it's just so crystal clear and perfect, sometimes it just doesn't sound natural because the natural state of the world is noisy. But there's something about hearing the record that just, I don't know, it's almost like the fire crackling, when you're in your house in the winter, there's something about that noise that, for me at least, takes me back, to a time where I thought the world was a better place.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds to me like you're saying that you like the feel of the touch of a human hand on it. I mean, everything is now computerized, kind of robotics, and there's no personality to it.
Yeah, I think so. Like, it's the same thing with, if you love reading books, you know what I mean? I have a Kindle, you know what I mean? But I would much rather grab a book off my bookshelf and open it up and read a book rather than look at a screen and read a book, you know what I mean? So I think that's a good comparison of, why I prefer putting my, records on my turntable as opposed to putting on my, iPod. So I think it's that connection.
I think another thing that I can see is when I was doing graphic design for actual like printed materials, posters, brochures, it seemed like really exciting. I'd get the thing back and here's the printed piece and wow, look at it. And then I think when design changed to be more on the internet, you do something, it was new for about a day, and they're like, change it, and you didn't even get to keep the old version, it's just gone. There's so many great designs out there like digitally that are just gone, never to be seen again. So I guess I like that still there's this thing that can like be produced that's going to still be around when I'm not here, that somebody might stumble upon or something. Whereas the digital world that we've kind of grown into, it just seems like it gets less and less, it just goes away quicker.
I think we have time for one more.
Well, I just was wondering, there's this resurgence of interest in the vinyl as it relates to albums, which we had. But I had a ton of 45s because it was cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there interest in those and not as much because of the art?
They do still make 45s. Nowadays I feel like it's so expensive to make a 45 of 2 songs and with the artwork. The artwork's usually the most expensive part, but so then you can only sell it for like $6.50. So you're really not making anything on it. So I think that slowly 45s just kind of got weeded out because for a little bit more money you can make the full length record. But I mean, DJs still want a 45 of that particular Beatles song, or because the 45, if you compare, a Beatles song on 45 to the album, that little bit more of information spread out with a faster speed, with more information in the groove, you do get a bigger, fuller sound out of it. So it's better sounding. And 45s, I think it was just, that was how records were being sold then, like the hit. We got to have a hit. And yeah.
You bought the 45 or you bought the expensive album. So you bought the 45. Now with the internet and everything, you can hear the songs many
Yeah.
times you want for nothing. So
People want the album maybe, but yeah. But No, a lot of times it would just be the single, and then maybe the next week they'd put out a cover, if I remember correctly. That was a little bit before I was born, so. But that's what I've heard.
Beatles put out a lot of picture sleeves, and those are very, very collectible, which has always been funny to me because the Beatles stuff, there was more of that out there than anything else. Yet that's the most collectible stuff today.
Yeah.
There was more of it, 10 times as much as anything else out there. But, I can remember as a kid walking into a department store and seeing the rack of the top 25 or the top 40 or whatever it was, 45s, and that always grabbed my attention even before the album.
Yeah, it's funny with the Beatles stuff because there was a ton of it out there, but Brett can probably attest to this. A lot of times when you get in like a used Beatles album or even a single, it's, have "I Love Ringo" written all over it, or "I Love Paul." So that kind of hurts the collectability of the record. It's kind of funny to see, though.
Yeah.
I've always admired album art, and I was wondering if any of the art that was done ever landed in like major collections of art museums and things like that. And if so, what artist, I guess, would you name that has done been most prolific?
That's a good question.
I know that there was an exhibition that came through Cincinnati not too long ago, like within the past couple of years, where it was about that. It was about showing the original artwork that was used for these album covers. So there's a David Bowie record in our exhibition here, and so in that photograph, the original photograph, as it was presented as a C print, there's also I got a call from a guy who runs a museum in California. It's a very tiny museum, but he's collecting paintings that were used for album artwork. So like the Derek Riggs Iron Maiden, Eddie, like those paintings, he would collect those, or like the paintings that were used for Miles Davis Bitches Brew, or the Santana record. I forget the artist's name. I can't think of the artist. But that is very collectible, and it does end up in museums. I think more likely as like it would be like a specialty museum that is about popular music, or in an exhibition like what came through Cincinnati. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that stuff is in demand for sure, and it's being cared for, right? It's being collected and cared for.
We can have a little bit. The Cooper Hewitt Gallery, which is affiliated with Harvard University, has an exhibit running right now. It's an Afro-American museum, but it deals with jazz, and they have a whole collection of jazz albums, Miles Davis, and the artists affiliated. It's really quite beautiful. It's in Cambridge, Mass, and there's in the summer. So.
Yep.
Yeah, nice collection too.
I wonder if it's sort of like Norman Rockwell, how he was
Yeah.
sort of thought of as this illustrator, commercial artist, and it wasn't until more recently that he's been admired on the level of some of these other
Right.
artists that are in museums. So.
Who was the first musician that actually did their own album cover? Have you got any idea?
I don't. Yeah, I don't know the first, but but we had some examples where musicians just created their own work.
Yeah, I think John Lennon did that one. That was just drawings he had done when he was a kid, I believe, but I'm not. I know Joni Mitchell did almost all of her covers.
Yeah, we've got him out there. So
Dylan's was sort of, I don't know. I think he kind of threw that one together, but and it was to get out of a contract. So he put a bunch of stuff on there that wasn't his favorite songs on that self-portrait album, and then kind of I think he could paint better than that, but
you guys
still iconic.
I was just thinking we should go ahead and wrap up, but maybe we could, if anyone who wants to stick around and talk some more, we can just go out into the gallery and chat for a bit. But I want to thank everybody for coming today. Have a good time at the
Thank you.
museum.